Gold Trails and Ghost Towns with Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, our tour guide for some of the placer mining locations, hard rock mining, and this time we're going south of the border today.
Yeah, we're going into that eastern Okanagan County and western Ferry County, which is kind of south of Grand Forks, Midway, Greenwood. In that area there, very similar country, Mike. The Kettle River comes through the Canadian side, goes into the United States, and then goes back out through Canada again, then back into the United States. And this is all mining country like Grand Forks, Greenwood, Phoenix, all through there. And this is the area we're concentrating on today.
Now, Ferry, there is a border crossing, I think, at Ferry. Is that the same community we're talking about?
Well, the old town of Ferry was actually south of that and across the river, Mike.
Okay. But this country, what were they looking for here?
Gold, always gold.
Gold. Yeah. And if they had to put up with it, other zinc and lead and stuff?
They'd take a little copper and a little silver, but the main attraction, the old lure, was gold, and good gold and surface.
Now, is this story going to lead us to anything today?
I think this story leads us to one of the most fascinating lost mine stories in the Northwest, and one that has never been repeated up till this year. Right. And we'll tell about that later.
Okay, and we'll continue in just a moment. Eastern Okanagan County, western Ferry County, Washington, just south of the Canadian-U.S. border. We'll do that when we come back from this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, and today, Bill, we're heading south of the border, I guess around the boundary country would be. What's the thread that ties this country together?
Has to be the Kettle River, Mike, because the Kettle River rises in Canada in the western part of the Kettle Valley, and the Canadian side goes down through past Midway, and then cuts down through Old Curlew and then Danville, back into Canada again, near Grand Forks, cuts out at Cascade City or close to Cascade City, and then down through an old place in Ferry County called Orient, then finally dumps into the Columbia River.
Now, did the prospectors who came here, did they come to placer the gold out of the Kettle River or not?
Yeah, the first prospectors followed the Kettle up and discovered places like Boundary Creek and Rock Creek and so on, which was called York Creek at that time, and did very well. But when they threw the north half of the Culver Reservation open, the Indian Reservation open in 1896, then the hard rock men flooded into that area. They knew there were showings mostly of gold. They were looking for gold primarily, with copper and silver to some extent. Yeah. And they started staking the gold, and little mining camps began springing up.
And what did the Indians of the Culver Reserve feel about this, having their reserve thrown open to miners?
Well, they didn't have much choice, and they threw the north half open because that was the mineralized area, basically, of the Culver Reserve. And the Indians were given certain reservations within that reserve, but they didn't have all the land as they had previous to 1896.
So all along the Kettle, towns sprang up. Like what? What towns?
Well, one of the first towns was a place called Bodie, and it was closely associated with another town called Old Terota. This is Bodie here, and it shows Bodie as it exists today. Still half a dozen buildings left, and in an area that is not very well traveled. You can go through that eastern part of Okanagan County, and you'll see a lot of fascinating places. You'll see Bodie, and you'll see Corkscrew Mountain, the remains of Old Terota, and then you cut down the road, heading north into Ferry County.
And this is the first country that was hard rock mined?
Basically, yeah.
I think when we did a show on Rossland, we talked about hard rock mining before, but this is a piece of what it looks like a rock pry to me, but what is it?
It's drill steel.
And this is what they drilled the holes to pour the powder down to blast.
Yeah, that's actually hexagonal. So it has 8 sides, and they turned that an eighth, an eighth, and an eighth. And if they're single jacking, one man hit it with a hammer himself. If they're double jacking, one guy held the steel and the other guy hit it with a hammer.
Now, how fast could you drill through rock to? I mean, this would take days, it would strike.
Well, you'd think so, but actually, I think the world record was 40-odd inches in 15 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, very, very quick.
And they're pounding through the through the rock.
Sure.
Then they'd want to clean that out. I've never seen one of these before, but this is for helping cleaning out the hole.
Yeah, that's what they call a spoon usually, and it means that let's clean up the hole, and then they can put the dynamite stick in there. And ordinarily that'd have a little hook on this, Mike, and they'd reach in and clean that out. That's the only way to clean it out, really.
And once you got it down, you put the dynamite down or the black powder down and set a torch to it, and Cleaned up the rubble.
Yeah, you took off, and then came back hoping the shot went off.
The concept of digging this down that hole, now this is made out of steel, not brass.
Yeah.
This could spark fishing out black powder or dynamite out of the hole. Did that ever create a problem?
Actually, what you would do there, you're actually, after you've made the hole, then you're fishing it out so you can put the dynamite in.
All right.
Okay.
Don't go in once you've got the explosive stuff down
Oh,
there.
no, it's called a missed shot, and you don't fool with missed shots.
That comes back to meet you later on.
Yeah.
So Bodie's one of the towns. Who are some of the people? We talk about these prospectors. Is there a guy named Bodie in this game or not?
No, not really. The original discoverers of the Bodie mine was a guy named DeWitt's, and he had a brother also. So the DeWitt's brothers discovered the Bodie mine. And it was so rich on the surface, they took out something like $80,000 in one small pocket, which would be about 4,000 ounces of gold out of a very small pocket. And on the strength of that, they sold the Bodie mine to another pair of brothers called the Wrigley brothers.
Any relation to the baseball Wrigleys, the chewing gum Wrigleys?
The very same, of chewing gum renown. And they never did make any money on the mine, although the mine produced over $1 million.
But fortunately, they made it in chewing gum.
Oh,
That's
sure.
amazing. Who wasn't in this area? I mean, we've run across so many amazing characters. This was the place you came to get your steak or to learn to stay out of this kind of game, I guess.
Oh, yeah, and remember that a lot of Canadians drifted across the line into the States, and a lot of Americans drifted across the line into Canada. The border wasn't considered too important.
A great mixing of countries right at that spot.
Sure.
That's Bodie. Any other communities? This Terota and Old Terota and
Yeah, this is one that as you go down from Bodie, you get into Ferry County, in the very edge of Ferry County, and this is the old town of Ferry. And this is a very unusual and rare photograph. Came from the British Columbia Archives, and it shows Ferry at its height, probably around 1898, Mike. And there's the main street of Ferry with several hotels, and off on the left-hand side of that photograph, you can see the Great Northern. So actually, that'd be a little later than 1898 because the train is there, so that's probably the turn of the century. And Ferry was one of these towns. The Canadians called it the toughest town this side of hell. And there were some very hard case miners in Ferry, and some guys just barely one step ahead of the law coming into Ferry. And if the law got too close, they stepped across the line into Canada, out of reach.
So the town is not there. The customs place that's there now is just a customs house, and it goes by the same name.
Oh, yeah. All that's left on the old side of Ferry is an old strong box that's all decrepit and decayed and well rusted, and you can see the faint outlines of some of the buildings in that particular area. But at one time, it was really a going concern. It was the feeder of towns like Greenwood and Midway and Phoenix and Deadwood and all these towns on the Canadian side.
But going concern, did it have a population of 1,000 or 500?
Well, not as big as this town we're showing here, which is Curlew. Now you go down the Kettle River, and you're now going east. And this is old. And this map shows Curlew at about the turn of the century. And this is typical of the little mining towns that were in this particular area. And fascinating shot showing the false front of Curlew.
500 or 600 people in Curlew, but it still attracted the railway, and this is, I presume, the Great Northern.
Yeah, James J. Hill, as usual, and this is, you know, the great genius of the Northwest, the empire builder. He was not only going to pick up the ore on the American side, he went right into Canada. So he was heading for Grand Forks and Phoenix and all these places that had mineral resources as well.
At this time, there was only a partial completed spur line from the CPR, sort of edging to this country. He was way ahead.
That's right. He was light years ahead of the CPR.
And he was called the Empire Builder, and this was just another little piece of his empire.
Sure.
This is a great-looking artifact that you've got here. This one, where do you find something like this?
Well, I was lucky. I picked it up years ago, and that's one of the Great Northern Railway lamps, and it's rather unique. Quite different from the CPR lamp, as you can see, Mike. Quite a bit bigger, and very fine brass. Made in St. Louis, I believe. And so this is one of the Great Northern artifacts, which are becoming increasingly difficult to get, actually.
Well, this is just a great piece of work. And this down here is the tank for, what was the fuel?
Well, it was
Coal
an oil, yeah.
An oil lamp.
Yeah.
But that is just a beautiful piece of work, and that's from the Great Northern.
That's from the Great Northern, yeah.
And James J., did he make a bunch of money here?
James J. didn't. He died before he completed his grandiose plans. You know, he was going to drive an 8 or 9 mile tunnel through the Coquihalla, and he died. And his empire passed on to his son, but his son wasn't cut from the same cloth as the old man, you know.
But while he was around, he certainly offered to the world something to emulate.
Oh, yeah, people loved the old man.
Got the CPR moving.
He was ugly as sin, and they loved him.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There are still some things to see. Unlike Ferry, Curlew's still got some stuff around.
Yeah, actually there are. I think the major building in Curlew is the old Anne Sorge Hotel. And the Ansorge Hotel is indicated in this photograph here. And this is the way it stands today. And as you go down that street and around the corner, you'll see another old place, which is the old Helfrey's General Store. So there are a few buildings left in Curlew, and they're trying to preserve what is left.
Yeah, people are suddenly valuing it.
Oh, sure.
So we got another town that's in there, which is really the focus of our story. We won't give it away. Danville.
Yeah, Danville is really the key town of this particular program. And Danville originally was called Nelson, Washington. And this is Nelson, Washington. And then they changed the name to Danville because people were confusing Nelson, Washington with Nelson, British Columbia. And Nelson, British Columbia at this time was a booming town with the Silver King Mountain and the big smelter there and everything else.
Well, it was a city.
That's right. It was a bona fide city, whereas Nelson, Washington was a few hundred people. So they changed, the Great Northern changed the name to Danville. And Danville was really typical of these little mining towns in the northern part of Washington State.
It was a supply function as well. It had a pretty well-developed storefronts.
Yeah, it was, and there were smugglers using the area, as they did continue to do so for about 50 or 60 years.
And any particular mines of note at this stage? What attracted the miner to Danville?
Well, it was, again, a gold proposition in Danville, with some copper, some silver, but predominantly gold. So in quick order, they discovered the Morning Star, and they discovered the Surprise, and the Lucille Dreyfus, and the Virginia, and half a dozen others.
And that's where we're going to discuss the story which brings us to this country.
Yeah, this is, as I say, a very, very intriguing story, well-researched, and we've done all the background, and I think they'll find it interesting.
Take a break here. We'll be back in just a second, though, to find out about the Golden Plate Ledge.
The lost Golden Plate.
We'll do that right after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barley. We're in Danville, Washington, a town of about 500, filled with characters, I would imagine.
Yeah, this main street shows the second main street of Danville, actually, and some of the characters were really quite fascinating, as most mining towns had. One of them was a justice of the peace who was dispensing justice and was highly thought of in the town, well respected, but he had a little hobby. And his little hobby was he was manufacturing counterfeit half-dollar pieces.
Did this Justice of the Peace have a name, or does that have to be lost in antiquity?
Yeah, probably it was Jenin. And it's difficult to know exactly the spelling of the name, but somebody in Danville actually found this counterfeiting machine under the floorboards of his house about 1920. And not only did they find the counterfeiting machine, they found some of the original blanks, that is the very low-grade lead with a little bit of silver in it and some of these were partially completed. So he may have taken off in rather a hurry. He had, in years past, actually, been convicted of counterfeiting. How he got to be a justice of the peace, I don't know.
He had to be a very creative fellow. He had to have dies, obviously, that would put that lady's face on one side and the E pluribus unum on the other.
That's right.
Well, I guess if poorly paid justice of the peace had to augment his income at every possible opportunity.
He thought so anyway.
Yeah. We talked about some of the mines, Virginia, how the Virginian ever got up into this country, but I guess mine names sort of followed them around,
Well,
right?
yeah, the Virginia was a famous name, and now this one was actually Morning Star, which is another famous name. And this shows the old workings of the Morning Star just after the turn of the century, and it was a long-lived mine. And so a lot of gold came out of this particular mine, and it carried right on into the 1930s. And this next particular shot shows a stock certificate of the Morning Star, and I purchased this from a guy called Victor Nelson, who still lives in Danville. He was a miner in the Morning Star in 1936, and they came across ore, Mike, that was spectacular. The ore was so shot through with free gold that it was running about $100,000 a ton, and this is a piece of the ore, and it gives you an example. You can show the free gold running right through it. So 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet would give you $100,000. And this particular ore probably has something to do with the lost mine story we're going to refer to.
Okay. The mine shafts are still all down in this country, and the Morning Star mine shafts are still seen?
Sure. This is part of the old workings of the Morning Star in the Virginia, right near the railway track, south of the bridge, down along the old Great Northern right-of-way there. And there are a number of shafts and tunnels into the wall all through there, searching for high-grade deposits.
You should be careful if you plan to go down and assess them yourself, because there are all sorts of hazards associated
Yeah,
with it.
including rattlesnakes. The country has
That'd
a
keep
significant
me-
population of rattlesnakes to keep you a little bit sharp.
That would keep me out of them, I think. Right there. Oh, there's a mine shaft. I'll think I'll leave it right there. That's right.
Well, it's not bad if you're careful.
This story of the lost Golden Plate ledge really comes right into your relatives, doesn't it?
Well, actually it does. I'd heard the story, but I couldn't trace it down. We knew there was a lost mine in the Danville area, and on just off chance, I asked my old Uncle Eric last year, 1987, whether he knew anything about the lost mine. He said, as it happens, I do. And he was in his 90th year. He just passed away a few months ago, but his mind was extremely sharp. And he said, when I was a young assayer in the Granby smelter in Grand Forks, a guy from the American side of the line, from Danville, he said, came in. His name, and he wasn't sure of his name, and his name was John Faulkner. And he was a sometimes miner, sometimes prospector. And he came into the Granby smelter and brought with him a piece of float.
What's float?
Float is a piece of ore that has been found, and they can't find the original vein. And this piece of float was about 18 inches by 10 inches by 1.5 inches thick, and he broke off a 2x2 piece of it, gave it to the assayers. They put it in their display case, and they melted down the rest of this piece of float, which was only about 50 or 60 pounds, and they got between 4 and 5 pounds of pure gold out of it. That's pounds, not ounces. And the story, Mike, is really quite fascinating because he told my uncle exactly what happened. But he told the Grand Forks Gazette, he said a different story to the Grand Forks Gazette. And this is the story he told the Grand Forks Gazette. And this is from June the 1st, 1917, issue of the Grand Forks Gazette. And amongst other things, he says, I found a vein containing good values in copper and a little gold. Wrong. This was the richest,
If you can get 4 to 5 pounds of gold out of a piece of float, you've got more than a little gold, I guess.
Most spectacular piece of float ever occurring in northern Ferry County. And then he said every afternoon when I came off shift in the Virginia mine, we resumed the search. And he actually searched his neighbor's property because some of them proved up their ground. So he didn't really find this on his own property. And the actual story he told the assayers was correct. And this is the story he told them.
Okay.
He said in 1912, he was sitting in Danville.
5 years earlier.
That's 5 years prior to this.
Yeah.
He was sitting in Danville looking out his window, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and his wife was in the kitchen, and an electrical storm passed through the valley, and strikes all over the place, ignited a tree on the far side of the valley, several miles away. We don't know whether it was 2.5 miles away or 4 miles away, but slightly to the southeast of the town across the Kettle River. He looks at that strike. He doesn't want to fight forest fire the next day because he's going to miss a day's wages. He mounts his horse, rides down through the town, across the Kettle, and the horse takes a little game trail. And there were scores of game trails in this area. Faulkner rides up this game trail a little ways. We don't know how far exactly. And he hears a noise, clink, kind of a metallic noise. He looks down. His horse has hit a little piece of rock, which is 18 inches by 10 inches by about 1.5 inches thick. He looks down at it. It looks brassy. He says, oh, lots of pyrites in that rock, and goes up towards the fire. This is his first priority. But a rain squall comes through, douses the fire. The horse turns around, rides down the same trail. Now he's not in a hurry. Steps off his horse, dismounts, picks up the rock, notices about 50, 60 pounds, pretty heavy. Tucks it under his arm awkwardly, rides back to his house in Danville, comes into the yard, throws this float into the grass, walks into the house, doesn't say a word to his wife. But he comes off shift, off the Virginia mine, about 3 months later, in the fall of the year. And as he comes off shift, the sunlight hits that ore sample a little differently, and looks at it and says, gee, that looks interesting. Picks it up, takes it back into the house and says to his wife, what do you think of this? She says, I think it's gold. Well, she was very sharp. He says, well, how do you know? Well, she said, we give it the scratch test. And she was she'd been involved in mining. She knew all about it. They gave it a scratch test. It was gold. It wasn't pyrites. So they think they have the world by the tail. He says, I know exactly where I found that. He goes out the door right now, rides up what he thought was the same trail. No indication of a ledge up there. He comes back, and the next day his wife and he go out, same area, and search it. They search that area all through the rest of 1912, all through 1913, all through 1914, all through 1915, all through 1916 until the spring of 1917, and they finally give up on it. And what had happened, Mike, I think is this, and I don't think there's much doubt about it. The Morning Star mine was a very, very rich mine in pockets. But between the Morning Star and the Virginia and the Lucille Dreyfus and other mines, there's a big gap. And I think that somewhere in that gap, there was a ledge, which is now covered by probably 3 or 4 feet of overburden. But a flat piece of that ledge broke off, and it tends to gravitate towards the surface, kind of percolates towards the surface. And that's what he found. So somewhere between the old Morning Star and the Lucille Dreyfus, in that Danville area, is what we call the Lost Golden Plate Mine.
And it's richer than anything that they ever dug out of the ground there, if it's big enough.
Oh, yes. I mean, even if it were only 20 feet by 20 feet, it would contain several millions of dollars in gold. And the gold in that country tended to run to the surface. So it makes all sorts of sense. It was a rotten quartz. And so that I think that it's one of the great stories of northern Ferry County.
Well, if this guy searched, and he had time on his hands, and he was there, and it was the kind of lure that would make it, but he didn't have the ability to dig down that 2 or 3 feet of overburden, and so he didn't have the technology to do it.
That's right. It was all handwork, and so somewhere beyond Danville, and this particular photograph shows Danville as it looks today. And as you look beyond Danville, you will see those mountains to the southeast, and there it is, right there. And somewhere in this particular shot probably lies the origin, the original vein of the Lost Golden Plate.
Could just about smell it, can't you?
Very, very interesting.
Have you gone and walked
story.
that? You got this once again from your uncle?
From my uncle, and from some other information from the old guy who used to work in the Morning Star mine, old Victor Nelson, who still lives in Danville.
Have you been there? Have you walked the country yourself?
Oh, sure I have, but
sure.
This is on the U.S. side, and if this were on the Canadian side, I would be doing more research trying to pinpoint exactly where that area was.
But it got the name of the Lost Golden Plate Ledge.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name that will bring people to their feet.
Oh, sure.
All right. Danville's, what's in Danville today?
Probably 75 people. Most of the old buildings with 2 or 3 minor examples are gone. The old Main Street is virtually burned out of existence. Not much mining activity in the area, although there is closer to Curlew.
But the concept that there may be something, just now let's see if I've got it. I go down through the old town of Danville, cross the Kettle River, then up and angle up to the west and north? Is that?
No, you cross the Kettle River and you go to the south and east, actually.
South and east.
Yeah.
Okay, and look for, feel what it might have been like to watch the lightning storm from across the river all those years ago.
Yeah.
Not a bad idea. Bill Barley, thank you for coming in again. Took our trip south of the border. What have we got in store for us for the next couple of shows? Have you got an idea for our next one?
Well, we'll be going into that Caribou district of British Columbia, Mike, and some interesting ground and some interesting stories in that particular part of the country.
All right. That's next time when we come back and do Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. It's our tour through the country, which was British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest. We've even snuck into Alberta on occasion to find the places where prospectors and all sorts of other people went to find riches, and usually what it created was just some great stories for us. But gold lures everybody. Thanks again.
You're welcome, Mike.
Join us next time for Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.